Welcome to the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show on the Grilling Truth Sports Network. I am your host for the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Kent Sterling. How you doing, Kent?
I am on pins and needles, Mike, because this Wednesday night is, you know what? It might not be the walkover we thought it was. And if you lose it against Northwestern at Assembly Hall, good God Almighty, what's going to come next?
Well, then you'll still be 11-4 and firmly entrenched in the NCAA tournament rankings, right? That's what I see from all these fans who are like, we're still 11-3. They don't bring up the fact that we're 3-3 against decent teams.
And not just the fans, but I saw Mike DeCourcy's mock bracket today, and he had Indiana as an 8 seed. Like, what?
What?
How could
really?
that possibly be? Yeah.
I actually like Mike DeCourcy and thinks he knows what he's talking about most of the time.
Yeah, and he's not one of those fanboy guys who's just – and nor is he a guy who's going to throw a team in just hoping to get clicks. He's not one of those, so I got to call Mike and find out exactly what he has seen from Indiana that leads him to believe that they could possibly be an 8 seed at this point. Maybe the switch goes on and things change a little bit. But right now, man, does that seem like the hopes for that are slim and none?
All right, so Indiana fell to 1-2 in Big Ten play with a 75-59 loss to Maryland on Saturday afternoon, and the score was nowhere near as bad as this was. At one point, it was 71-41 before they subbed. Indiana's second straight loss drops the Hoosiers to 11-3 overall. My worry is this: it's the second time in the second straight road game where Indiana wasn't even competitive.
Yeah, this is not good, and it's not a portent of good things to come either. I don't think. And this happens. I mean, as teams lose, right, you tend to get hypercritical of coaching. But with 12 minutes left in this game, or 11 and change, you had Finney, Durham, Anderson, Davis, and Race Thompson on the floor at the same time. I don't know anybody who knows anything about basketball who would look at that fivesome and think, okay, we're going to be able to squeeze some points out of these guys. They are, if anything, at least three of them are offensively inept. You can't possibly score the basketball with those five guys on the floor. And so you had Lisa Byington, who is the sideline person for Fox during the game, listen to Mark Turgeon during a timeout, and Turgeon says, okay, the only way they can score is in transition and from the foul line. This is a coach talking to his players. Coaches never say stuff like that to their players, but Turgeon was so confident of the ineptitude of Indiana's half-court offense that he just flat out told his guys that.
Yeah, and my biggest concern is after last Sunday's collapse against Arkansas, and with almost a full week to prepare, this is the best that we came up with.
Yeah, and I don't understand what the problem is. I know they're not connected. I know that, the offense is kind of weird. I know that, you're running kind of a 10, if not 11-man rotation. But I don't know, where the fix would be. If you're trying to get this thing better, I don't know where that fix comes from. Because, what do? Do you just give Devontae the green light from inside the half-court stripe and say, if you touch it, shoot it? I don't know how you get points. I think what you've got to do is you've got to start running the offense through Trace rather than have this be so guard-centric. You've got possessions and in multiple possessions consecutively where Trace Jackson Davis doesn't touch a basketball, and you can't have that if you want to win basketball games.
Well, Archie Miller in his post-game press conference made a profound statement. I'm being sarcastic. In this league, you're in a deep ocean. There's a lot of waves, and you have to ride them out and figure out how you can survive it and keep moving forward. For us, that's the way it is. I can't complain about our guys and their approach and what we're doing. How can he not complain about it?
Yeah, I just don't get it. And look, I'm to the point now where I'm starting to think about Dayton and wonder if he knew what the hell he was doing at Dayton. He went to an Elite Eight. How does a coach that looks like he's and holds players accountable at this rudimentary level? How was the guy ever successful is what I can't figure out. And that's where the hope lies for me, is that he's a better coach than what we have surmised through these 2.5 seasons, and that we're going to see the fruits of that labor. He's recruited in the right way from the inside out. He's going to continue to do that. But what happens, and what would be really deleterious to Indiana, is if guys like Caleb First and Christian Lander from Evansville, if they start to look at Indiana and think, okay, this team's toast, I'm not going there. I'm not even going to consider them because look at where they are. We're 3 years in, the bloom's off the rose, and let's go someplace else. Let's go to Purdue. Let's go to Louisville, go to Butler, go to where they've already got a culture of winning. I don't think Archie's done a very good job of communicating, at least to the fan base, what the culture of Indiana is.
And for the fifth straight game, the Hoosiers shot worse than 30% from three-point range, 4 for 18.
Well, they're so easy to defend, right? I mean, if you extend on guards, they're dead. How are they going to score if and that's what you've seen. The games where Indiana's been competent offensively is where guards have kind of sucked back a little bit. And the last time we really saw it happen was against Notre Dame in the Crossroads Classic, where Notre Dame kind of packed it in with a 2-3 for a while. And then finally, Mike Brace sort of woke up with about 17 minutes left and said, we're going to go man against these guys and pressure the basketball and pressure the wings. And let's see where that takes us. If you do that against Indiana, I don't know how they score because you've got guards who are more interested in their own offensive statistics than they are in the team's ability to win. And that, I think, is why you don't see Trace get the ball as much as he ought to.
And you see that one of the strengths of this Indiana team is getting to the foul line. Unfortunately, one of the strengths, or one of the weaknesses, is converting once they get there. And this team has improved from last year's 65% all the way up to 68% this year. I think we've already seen the free throw shooting cost them one game. And they don't have a good enough team to be able to survive not shooting free throws well in the Big Ten.
No, they need to keep possession of the basketball, no stupid turnovers, and you've got to make foul shots. And if you do those two things, maybe you've got a chance. But if you're not going to make more than 11 of 18, and that's what they were against Maryland, it was a 30-point game at one point. I mean, Indiana could have made 10 more foul shots than they attempted, and they're still not competitive in this game. But looking forward, I mean, here's another bright spot, right, is that Purdue got their ass run out of Champaign last night against Illinois. Winning on the road is really, really tough in the Big Ten. So that might be part of this, but we keep seeing the same problems over and over again, silly turnovers, and then not making foul shots. That's going to wind up costing a close games at Assembly Hall, hopefully not Wednesday night.
Yeah, but my concern is this. It's not that we're losing games on the road. It's how we're losing them. We're losing them with no competitive spirit at all. And in both away games in the Big Ten on the road, and there's better teams than the two teams that have beat them like this, they've at some point or another been down by 30 points in both games in the second half.
Yeah, the one thing where I can look at this past game and say, you know what, all right, is that they were down 36-33 at one point until the roof collapsed on them. But they continued to fight a little bit and continued to find a way to be competitive in that game, at least for a while. And maybe there's something within that where the coaching staff and the players, they can say, okay, this is what we do well on the road. This is the kind of effort we've got to have. With these guys on the floor, we gave ourselves a chance. With those guys on the floor, we had no chance. I mean, I get that Indiana doesn't have any tremendous players. They don't have any All-Americans on this team. They don't have anybody who's going to make any kind of unless it's like Trace Jackson Davis being the Big Ten Freshman of the Year or something like that. But like first team Big Ten, second team Big Ten, or All-American, you don't have a guy like that. And if you don't have a guy like that, you got to figure out as a collective how to compete well. And I don't think that that's accomplished by going as deep into the bench as Indiana goes. It just doesn't make any sense to me where you've got two bigs who are okay. You're going to throw Deron Davis out there, and thank God he didn't pick up 2 fouls in a minute like he had the two previous games. But you've got guys who, like, you got some guys who can play and some guys who just can't function offensively. And you're playing the guys who can't function 20 minutes each during games. You can't do that. You can't make yourself that easy to defend.
Yeah, and the Hoosiers turn the ball over 14 times. The worst part of
Yep.
that, on the road, it turns into 25 points for Maryland, and points off turnovers. Maryland outscores Indiana 25-9. You can't have that on the road. You can't have that at home. And it is generally, to me, I think the thing that worries me the most is the lack of impact that Rob Fennessy's having on this team.
Yeah, and he's like the antithesis of Devontae Green to me. I think Devontae goes hunting shots, and I think Rob just kind of lays in the thicket, never wanting to take a shot. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I'd be much happier with Rob taking more, Devontae taking less. I wish these guys would meet in the middle somehow.
Yeah, but nobody's meeting in the middle right now.
No, there's no meeting at all.
Joey
And at some point, it's going to invade their overall kind of mentality and their psychology. And at some point, you're going to go through a stretch, hopefully not like they did last year where they lost 12-13, but these guys are going to get down a little bit, and maybe they should. Yeah, Archie's got one of two ways to go, right? One is to stick his foot in somebody's ass or in some people's ass and try to motivate them that way, or just continue to clap like a nut on the sidelines and keep praising, occasional good deeds. I don't here's what I really don't get is his behavior on the sideline is so oddly similar to Tom's, right? I mean, Tom clapping about everything, posing and, all of that. Archie doing the same thing. He's always extolling the positive instead of getting in a guy's ass about playing at a level that is way beneath what he should be at. I just don't get it.
Yeah, you have one guy that scores in double figures, and it's not Trace Jackson Davis. Trace Jackson Davis only played 23 minutes, and he is your best scorer, I think, on the floor.
Yeah, I don't understand it. And Devontae wound up with some reasonable offensive statistics, but a lot of those came, after the deed was done. They wind up losing they lost by 16, right?
Yeah.
And they were down by 30 and could have been down, at the end by 40 if Turgeon kind of didn't take his foot off the gas. But the 18 points from Green were kind of a myth because of the late offensive flurry that, Indiana was kind of allowed to engage in. And then you've got Fennessy, and Rob plays 22 minutes, scores 2 points on 3 shots. I mean, what the hell are you doing? You're in the Big Ten. These are the big leagues, pal. You got to get out there and carry some weight offensively. I don't care if he goes 1 for 8. I'd rather him go 1 for 8 than 1 for 3. I want him trying a little bit to score the basketball, and other guys get him the ball in a place where he can score it. I just kind of – I don't – and we never would, right? I mean, this is 71-41. There's not a lot you're going to look at and say, boy, they ought to do that more. But still, I think that these guys – they got to change their mindset, and I think Archie's got to change his.
Yeah, and next up for Indiana is Northwestern, who's down to 7 scholarship players. But this is a team just a couple weeks ago only lost to DePaul by 5. But, of course, right after that, they lost to Hartford by a point. They lost by 9 to Minnesota. They've only got 7 scholarship players. But this is still a game that worries me, Kent.
Oh, absolutely. There is nobody left on the schedule who shouldn't worry the living hell out of us. And the reason this one should worry you is that if you lose this one, where are you going to go get one? Where are you going to get a W? You've got to continue to tread water in the Big Ten somehow or another. And if you can't beat Northwestern, the bottom feeder, the absolute 14th team in the 14-team Big Ten, if you can't beat them at your place, you have fundamental problems that you may never recover from. And once that ball starts rolling downhill, you got real problems because it affects recruiting. It affects everything.
Now, my question to you is this, because I see the IU fans fight over it. It takes a while to build your program.
Right.
But when I look at the top 20, the thing that really stands out to me, Kent?
What's that?
Oh, the fact that Dayton's in the top 20.
Oh, yeah, right.
I mean,
Right.
so if it
Yeah.
takes 4 or 5 years to build a team, why is Dayton one of the best teams in the country 3 years after Archie left?
Well, maybe you can ascribe some of it to Archie.
I don't think you
I mean,
can
that would
because
be
they
the
weren't
most,
that good the last couple of years.
but maybe he had them turned. I don't know. I look
That
at
would be like
Indiana.
saying Don Donaher is the reason that Archie was successful, Kent. Come on.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. Dayton just seems to be Dayton, right? And Butler seems to be Butler in the places where culture has been built. I think coaches like that can kind of succeed. And I'm going to say like that because we really haven't seen anything from Archie to this point that would give you like reason to believe that there's something greater over the horizon. And if not, look, the thing that I'm trying to avoid, and the reason why I'm trying to counsel patience, is because we went through that misery with Crean for years. Even the Big Ten championship team, the last one, and they beat Kentucky in the NCAA tournament, and that was beautiful. But still, you knew that the bloom was off the rose, and this thing was kind of unwinding, and that 13 was always going to be the high water mark for the program under Crean. I just can't go through another 4 years of pulling my hair out because Indiana's got the wrong guy.
See,
I
luckily
just
I have
can't
no
go through
hair,
it again.
so um,
You don't have to worry about it.
the other. Well, see, I went ahead and I just cut it all off because I'm a Bengals fan, a Reds fan, and a
Oh,
Pacers
good,
fan.
good
So,
Lord.
and IU and Xavier. Xavier usually gives me some hope, but other than that, I mean, my hair would have all been pulled out by now, anyways. And my question is, and we've seen guys like this. I think Mike Tomlin's a guy in the NFL like this, where
Yeah,
he was a much better coach when he didn't have superstars. Is
right.
Archie Miller? I mean, is he a better coach with less talent at a smaller area where he can get what he wants done? And because I think this, when you're recruiting at Dayton and you get the players in there at Dayton, they're going to do what you want them to do because they are more grateful for being there.
Yeah,
Indiana, you got like guys like Romeo Langford and Devontae Green who feel like maybe something's owed to them. And there are a lot of times you have to go about coaching them differently. And some guys cannot communicate with guys like that, especially a guy like Archie, who, Archie and Sean were both tough, hard-nosed basketball players. And a lot of times you don't really understand the guy that has, he's 6'5" and he could jump out of the building. And that guy doesn't understand that he has to work once he gets to a certain level because everybody else is that good. And does Archie have a hard time communicating with guys like that?
well, and can you communicate with guys can anybody communicate with a guy like that?
Well, I think it's safe to
Guys
say
who
that
think they're
guys
going to
like,
the league.
yeah, but guys like Krzyzewski can, Chris Mack, even at Louisville, has been able to communicate with guys like that. And, I mean, Travis Steele, I mean, when you look at guys like Najee Marshall, I mean, Najee Marshall, who's a really good player who I think's got a shot to play in the league, after they played UC in the big crosstown shootout and he scored like 35 points, he had a
Yeah.
couple practices where he didn't play that hard. And when they played the next game, he sat Najee Marshall for the first half.
Yeah, we don't see that happen to Indiana ever. Ever.
Yeah, and my point is, you got guys coming out of AAU that are these superstars. At AAU, they run their team if they're a stud. You know that.
Right.
And at some point, especially when they first come here as freshmen, if you don't show them that's not the way this is going to be, it just kind of festers and continues. And I think what we see is an Archie Miller offense, or an offense Archie Miller wants to run that his players don't, so they don't.
Yeah, and that's a problem. That's a monumental problem, and that's why, back in 2015, Butler successfully recruits a kid like Sean McDermott, and nobody else. Like Indiana wasn't on him. Indiana didn't recruit him. Purdue didn't recruit him. And Sean McDermott came to Butler too skinny to compete as a freshman, but they built him into a hell of a basketball player where he is now maybe the second most important person on the sixth-ranked team in the country. And Indiana would look the other way because he wasn't talented enough. Matt Painter says this all the time. You got to get old and stay old. And Indiana's not old. Indiana's got one functional senior on the roster. It's got a few juniors, one with great talent in Justin Smith. The others are kind of placeholder type guys. You've got to find a way to get old, stay old, and recruit the right kind of kid. Decide what your culture is, recruit to it. And I get the feeling that at Indiana, what you wind up with is kind of one of the least of the programs who's trying to recruit the best. Instead of being the best of the programs who's recruiting the right type of kid for the culture that they've built. And I don't think that you can succeed being the least of those trying to recruit the best. You've got to go get the right guys, not just any five-star guy.
Yeah, and what about a guy like Paul Scruggs? And
yeah.
I bring him up because Romeo Langford obviously is more talented than him.
Yep.
And I was talking to one of the Xavier coaches about a year ago because those guys were all on staff, pretty much most of them, with Chris Mack when he was there. And I could tell you, they recruited Romeo, but they were more interested in Scruggs because they said he fit the way they play. And when I watch Paul Scruggs, not the greatest shooter, he's kind of streaky, but he's a guy that'll get after it and battle. That's the kind of guys that need to be here.
I got a little bit I was off-put a little bit by Scruggs when he decided to leave Southport and go to Prolific Prep. I thought, okay, I'm not sure what this move is about. I really liked the Southport program. I didn't understand the move, and I thought maybe he was going to be one of those kids who kind of bounce from wherever and go to La Lumiere or Oak Hill, and that he was looking to find a path clear to the league. But he's been very, very functional, and it appears to me from a distance to be really amenable to coaching in a way that kind of surprised me. So if he had pledged Indiana, I would have thought, uh-oh.
Hey,
but you know what?
This is
Xavier,
my point,
he's the
though,
right guy
Kent.
at the right place.
And I knew you would go that way. And my point is this. When you go play for Chris Mack or Travis Steele, you're going to have to do what they say.
Yeah.
There's no other way about that. I mean, if Romeo Langford goes to a place like that, if Romeo Langford would have been better off in Louisville because Chris Mack wouldn't have put up with it.
And here's what I don't get, too, is I look at this. You look at a guy like Travis, and Travis was an assistant at Indiana, and prior to that, he was an assistant at Ben Davis High School and a guy who had coached a little bit AAU-wise as an assistant. And everybody liked him, and he knew he was going to be a good recruiter because he's really likable and he worked really hard. But Indiana goes out and recruits a guy like Archie because I think in large part they're looking to satisfy kind of the bloodlust of a fan base who wants a name coach instead of going out and getting the right coach. And the reason that that's been corrupted is that Indiana hadn't had a culture that it wants to emulate since, maybe that nobody wanted to emulate Knight's culture at the end because it stood for a lot of wrong things. But the Indiana culture just hasn't existed since then. When they've gotten good recruits, they've been good. When they didn't get good recruits, they weren't good. And that tells you no culture because culture is that thing that kind of evens it out and lifts the floor a little bit. And Indiana hasn't had a lifted floor in a long time.
Yeah, and the other thing is this. We don't know if a guy like Travis could have instilled that because he followed Chris Mack. The culture he wanted was already in place. And I think Travis would have done a great job. But once again, I would say you're coaching a different sort of player between Xavier and Indiana, and you are because you're not coaching as good of players at Indiana. Right,
but you could have gone, they hired Archie. They didn't hire Chris. And I, before he went to Ohio State, I think that Chris Holtman would have wanted to talk to Indiana about earning $3.5 million a year.
Yeah.
I think he would have been open to that conversation. You could have talked to Dane Fife. I'm not even sure Dane was spoken to. Dane might be exactly the right guy to have Indiana become what Indiana needs to become, or he would have been 2.5 years ago. But nobody took that seriously because the only place he's been a head coach is at IPFW. But what he did at IPFW was stupendous. And the amount of work he put in as a recruiter and as a guy who built that program from nothing, no chance. I was talking to Bob Lovell when he took the job. I was saying, what do you think? And he said, I think it's a mistake because he's not going to be able to win 10 games there. You know what? He won 19, 20 games, and they wound up in a conference in large part because of Dane's work. Dane Fife is a hardworking guy and a guy with Indiana in his blood. And I wish that had been a more serious discussion, assuming that it wasn't.
Yeah, and a guy like Trevon Blewett, was he recruited by IU?
Yeah, I think everybody was kind of on Trayvon, but
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there. That's a great question.
Because the thing about Trayvon is, before he got to Xavier, all I heard was what a troublemaker he was. And his dad was a little bit of a pain in the butt. But when he got to Xavier, he even stays the fourth year instead of trying to jump to the NBA. I'm just saying that when you have the culture built that it's a team, I mean, look what John Beelan did at Michigan.
Yeah.
And the
question West
is,
Virginia.
Yeah.
That might be even
every
more
place he's been.
Amazing. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so you got to look for that. And I'm not sure. I love Fred Glass. I think he's been a tremendous athletic director. I think the athletes are very well taken care of, and I think that they have benefited greatly from being student athletes at Indiana under kind of Fred Glass's watchful eye. But as far as hiring coaches for a marquee program, like you look at it, and either there's something systemically wrong that doesn't allow these programs to kind of fulfill or what fans believe should be their destiny, or there's something wrong with the hiring process where we haven't gotten the coaches who can do it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's
a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's a mystery to me because it's still Indiana. I know that it's not the high-profile job we wish it was, that it once was. But it's still high profile enough you could get most any coach you want.
I'll tell you what's got to happen is that Archie Miller's got to start doing media. Archie Miller has got to start doing like a weekly hit with Dan Dakich, and he would be the right guy. So I'm just going to say with Dan, not anybody else, but do it with Dan so he can explain his philosophy and he can tell us.
Yeah.
Huh?
Damage control, basically.
Well, yeah, or at least communication so that we have an expectation like, oh, he's playing all 10 guys because of this, or, oh, the offense is, runs this way because of X. Right now, we're kind of in this vacuum. He's really not very communicative in post-game press conferences. He really doesn't tell us much. He's got to be more open. And he's got to share with that fan base, or people are just going to rely on what they see on the floor as how they grade this thing and its growth. If this thing is going to need another year and a half to evolve into what it's going to become under Archie Miller, I don't know, other than the contract kind of forcing Indiana to maintain him, I don't know why they would.
Yeah, I don't either. And I mean, it's just, I never thought I would see Indiana basketball in the kind of shape it is in today, or the kind of shape it's been in since Coach Knight left. And I knew you always have a drop-off when you have a coach like Knight leave. And especially, though, I think that, and I hate to say this because I'm a huge Bob Knight fan, but I mean, this all started in the mid-'90s.
Yeah.
The start of this fall is on Coach Knight.
He just stopped recruiting. And that was, I think that's how he kind of challenged himself and continued to make it interesting for himself, is that he thought, you know what, I know I can win championships with great players. Let's see if I can win a championship with, mediocre players. I don't need to recruit. I'd rather go hunting. Just bring anybody in here and let's see what we can whip up. I think that's kind of who he became. And that was a shame, because it denied him the opportunity to choose his successor and maintain kind of that tough, hard-ass Indiana
kept
culture.
The culture. Yeah.
Yeah. And it just evaporated and it's almost, there's a self-destructive quality to Bob Knight that's sort of undeniable. And that is, I think, the worst result of that kind of self-destructiveness is that Indiana has never been what it should have been after he left, minus the first 3 years that he was gone, because those 3 years, Indiana was still Indiana, because those were still Indiana guys. Those were still Knight guys. So
you know what I would equate it to, Ken? I would equate it to Ohio State and Woody Hayes. Woody Hayes, his last few years, kind of went off the deep end. You had him punching Charlie Bauman in the '78 Gator Bowl, and then he left. And they had Earl Bruce, but you still had that culture there. But those people were not happy with Earl Bruce winning 9 or 10 games a year. And as soon as Bruce is gone around 86 or 87, really until Urban Meyer came back, well, Jim Tressel in the late 90s, I mean, there's a 10-year period there where you kind of lost the culture. But the culture was saved because Ohio State brought in Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer, who weren't great people, but they knew how to win football games.
Yeah, and Cooper was not the answer to anybody's
I think
prayers.
John Cooper, if he stays at Arizona State, they'd have built a monument to him. But he was not the type of coach, personality-wise, that could handle a job like Ohio State. I think John Cooper was a really good football coach because Arizona State was terrible when he got there. He got him to the Rose Bowl. He won him a Rose Bowl. If he would have stayed there, he'd have averaged eight wins a season for the next 2 decades, probably won a Rose Bowl or 2, and everybody would have thought he was a great coach.
Yeah.
But I think personality-wise, John Cooper did not fit at Ohio State. I think the pressure was too much for him.
And maybe we're in that same jackpot with Archie.
That's where I'm going with this.
Yeah, you've got to win, like we were saying, you've got to win the public relations battle for a while. You can't just operate as though this is your own little private fiefdom and you answer to nobody unless you hang banners. If you hang banners, then, I mean, you can jump on the AD's desk and take a leak if you want to, and I'm not sure that Bob Knight didn't do that.
Yeah,
but until you win banners, man, until you prove it on the court, you have got to win in the court of public opinion, or you got a problem. And without that contract being what it is, and they owe Archie, they signed him to a 7-year deal, and until I think it's like April 30th of 2022, if they fire him before that, they owe him every penny of that contract through those 7 years. After that date, it becomes 50% of the remaining money on the contract. But until this thing kind of gathers gravity, he's got to go out and do some work in selling this thing to fans. And that doesn't mean going down to Huber's farm, once every year and that's it, or doing his radio show every Monday night. Yeah, you can't. You've got to get out there and you got to make your pitch and you got to explain stuff. And if you can't explain it, then you're going to have a problem. And that's why you've got to explain it to Dan, because Dan is going to understand it. And then Dan, for the rest of the week, if it kind of passes muster with him, he's going to extol your virtues a little bit and preach patience. And that's important with his fan base. But to this point, Archie does like one interview. I'm going to go to Butler tomorrow at 2:00, and I'm going to talk to LaVall Jordan. Like that, they're the 6th-ranked team in the country. It's going to be me, David Woods, Dustin DePirac, and that's like there will probably be a couple of TVs there because the cold season's over. But I can sit down, and this is true with Holtman too. Sit down, and talk to those guys for 15 minutes. Yeah. And with Indiana, you need. I mean, it's like like you're trying to get to the Pope. You've got to like make requests and it's denied, and make requests and it's denied, and it's ludicrous. I mean, I don't know who they think they are. They continue to act like the basketball world begins and ends at the Monroe County border, and it doesn't. They got to get over themselves.
No, and it's been a quarter of a century since it has. So to get it back to that, they have to be more forthcoming.
Yes. And even then, like Knight would talk to people. Like Knight would talk to Malcolm Moran or to Bob Kravitz. He was communicative, and this just doesn't work. You can't you can't continue to operate like this is anything but a 19-win team. That's what the program is. And
It's a
until you figure
19-win
that out, you
team?
got
When
a
are we
problem.
getting 19 wins? That'd be awesome.
Well, last year.
I thought
Hey,
last year was 18, wasn't it? Was it 19?
Yeah,
We're not counting
19.
NIT wins, are we? I don't count NIT wins.
That gives us reason for a little bit of hope. Is it took Pat Chambers? What is it? It's his 8th or 9th year out of Penn State. They never made the tournament, but they're a legitimately good team this year. I don't know whether Archie is Pat Chambers, but at least they're good.
But that's a football program. It's hard to win in a football program.
Yeah.
And Penn State, other than the occasional year every 6 or 7 years, and trust me, as long as Tom Allen's here, let's not get this messed up, this is never going to be a football school. So, right. I mean, unless Urban Meyer comes here, then maybe. But
he would have.
When I look at this schedule, why would Urban Meyer come here?
When he was at Bowling Green, he wanted Indiana's job.
Okay. I thought you meant now. You couldn't give him enough money to get him to come here now.
No.
But, I mean, right now we're sitting at 11 wins. What do you think this team ends up with win-wise?
Oh, I think 18 is they got to win 7 of these last 17, right? I mean, I can't believe that Indiana isn't going to wind up being competent somehow or another at Assembly Hall. So you've got home games against Northwestern. Then you follow it up with a home game against Ohio State. That has an opportunity not to be pretty. A home game against Michigan State. Can I amend my prediction?
Yeah, because I thought you were way off base when you first said it, but I was going to let you read the schedule and see if you were still sticking with it.
You know, that's the way my brain works every once in a while. I blurt out a number and then kind of try to justify it on the back end.
Yeah, you were like 3 or 4 above what I was thinking. So, because when I look at it, at Rutgers is probably a loss. Ohio State's probably a loss. At Nebraska should win, but it's on the road. Michigan State, I don't care where. We could play them in Archie's backyard and we're in trouble. Maryland, from what I just saw, it probably ain't going to matter if we're home or away. At Penn State, at Ohio State. Maybe we could get Purdue and Iowa at home. At Michigan, I think this Michigan team's going to prove out to be a not very good team by the time this is done, too.
You know, Dan said something on his radio show, and Juwan Howard was hired. That made me laugh. He said, well, Archie just became the 13th best coach in the Big Ten, which made me laugh. But I think Juwan's going to actually be a legitimately decent basketball coach at Michigan. I think he's going to have to grow into it. But I think that's got a chance to work out. And at least they've become a program that has embraced its heritage a little bit, and you got to give them that.
Well, I'm going to give you this, and I never thought I'd say this, but I'm going to agree with Dan Dockich on this one.
Yeah.
Not that I
haven't
don't
watched
like
them
Dan,
play a gob. You know, they played Michigan State the other day, but I chose football instead of watching Michigan play Michigan State. So I got to get on the Wolverines a little bit. But man, between watching Butler, Indiana, Purdue. I watch DePaul when I can. I watch Big East basketball when I can, Big Ten when it's convenient. But Michigan just hasn't kind of fallen into my lap, so I've got to plead ignorance.
Yeah.
Although Teskey, how the hell long has Teskey been in that program? He's been there for like 17 years. It's unbelievable.
But yeah, I stick to the Big East. I think it's better basketball, to tell you the truth, this year.
Well, from top to bottom, it's really, really good. The bottom end, everybody thought that Providence was going to have a really, really tough time. And look, they're undefeated in Big East play. So,
well, Cooley's a really good coach, I think.
Yeah, he is.
And really, I don't think there's a team in there that's not well coached. St. John's is a lot better now that they got Chris Mullen out of there.
Yeah, that's too bad for Butler and for Xavier, because Mullen being at St. John's was very, very helpful.
Yeah. Well,
I've been surprised that DePaul has kind of taken a step back with their losses in the Big East. I thought that they were going to be – I know we're only a couple of games in, but I thought that they were going to be better out of the gate than they've been.
Well, I think they'll end up being better, but like you said, the Big East is tough, and they just beat up on a couple Big Ten teams, so you can't read too much into that.
That's true.
But
That's true.
I guess we shouldn't talk like this doing a Big Ten Indiana basketball show, but
Well, what are you gonna do?
it's
I mean,
just true. I mean, when I go to the Centos and I watch Xavier play Villanova, it is
yeah,
completely different than what I see when I see Indiana play Purdue. And I mean,
that
it's
is a
not to
game
be
that
mean.
I will not miss live. Is Villanova coming to Hinkle to play Butler?
Oh yeah,
Because possession by possession, it is just an unbelievable war of wills and of execution. And the first team that lets down gets beat, and it's so much fun to watch.
yeah, and it's the game I always look forward to with Xavier because when Villanova comes to town, it's going to be a 2 or 3 point game, and they're going to beat the hell out of each other. And the same thing when Xavier plays Butler. I mean, it's going to be a game.
And there's another guy, not to provide maybe false hope to Indiana fans, but Jay Wright didn't really have that thing working at Villanova for a couple of years. It took a while for that thing to kind of grab and get traction, but when it did, all of a sudden they got really, really good.
But once again, it's Villanova, and they hadn't been good
Yeah,
in a long time either since Riley
right.
Massimino was rolling around on the sidelines. So I don't know. I hope it works out. I'm not going to judge Archie yet, but if I had to judge him so far, I'd give him an F, but I am hopeful. So, and really can't, since we're on an IU show, I just lied and said that I'm being hopeful because I'm not that hopeful anymore. I need some help. We need to get some wins.
Well, you know what? We're more than 2 years away from a period where it would make any sense whatsoever for Indiana to do anything different from Archie. So we may as well, imbibe from that chalice of hope and find a way to enjoy this next 27 months because it's not going to change before then, at least not from a leadership perspective.
Well, the good thing is, if they wanted to, they could, because Fred Glass does bring in like $5 gazillion a year into the athletic program.
Yeah, but he ain't going to, as his
I
last
know.
act as an AD, he ain't going to pull the trigger. And whoever the new guy is, unless the new guy's got, balls the size of watermelons, there's no chance that the first act of that guy's regime is going to be to fire and then replace Archie Miller and put his job in a complete jackpot on the other end. I'm just hoping. I hope beyond hope that he can coach better than it looks like. I don't get the rotation. I don't get the offense. But you're never going to get an offense when you shoot it like you're blind.
Yeah.
If you shoot it well, offenses all look great. And if you shoot it like crap, offenses all look terrible. And these guys just can't shoot.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, if they lose to Northwestern, that article I wrote 3 years ago after they hired Archie, where I put why Archie Miller is the right man for the Indiana job, I'm going to go delete that from the internet.
You might want to get a head start there. You might want to get that working now.
Yeah, but you know what? A lot of Indiana fans read it. A lot of people read it. So,
Well, if it winds up being wrong, I'm not sure that that's a plus.
well, I'll tell you though, I've still got to go pull that 71-70 prediction of an IU win on that article down too, because a lot of people read that too.
Yeah, well, but again, a lot of people, they were optimistic last night when the Boilermakers went to Illinois and they crashed and burned utterly. I mean, that was just terrible.
Yeah, but that's
Sasha
Purdue. That's not the
Stefanovic
same as
was
Indiana. Nobody expects Purdue to do anything.
Oh, wait a minute. Why?
Because they're Purdue. They never do anything.
Well, they went to the Elite Eight last year, and they've won the last 2 Big Ten championships.
It means nothing. When's the last time they went to the Final Four? Last time they went to the Final Four, Joe Barry Carroll was the center.
It's the truth.
And
Well,
Gene Katie wasn't even coaching
I love
there
your
yet, was
passionate
he?
disregard for the Boilermakers, but
Dude, I grew up during the Bobby Knight era. I always have nothing but passionate disregard for Purdue. But I
we'll
will
hope
say
for the best
this.
on Wednesday
I
night.
actually was impressed enough by their fans and by how hard their team played that I know you're not supposed to cheer from press row, but last year in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, I was actually cheering for them.
You had to. I mean, to me, they were really, really, really impressive. And there's another example of the way to run a program. Like if I drove up to West Lafayette today, Matt Painter would sit down and talk to me for 15 minutes. You know what I mean? And it's not all about access. And that's not what really I'm congratulating. It's about being comfortable enough with yourself to share what you're doing in the moment, honestly, with people who have reasonable questions.
Yeah.
And with Archie, you don't get that kind of access. And I'm not sure why. So I'm going to assume that he's not comfortable enough in the position to grant it.
Or he just doesn't care.
That
He
there could
doesn't
be
have
that.
time for you.
You know what? And he really doesn't.
Well, you know
he
what?
Is not.
What you ought to do is give him an autographed copy of your book, and maybe he'll read it and decide that he would like to, sit down and talk to you sometime about your book, Oops, which can be bought on Amazon, right?
It sure can. You go to Amazon and look, you just search Oops Kent, and up it'll pop, and you can get the audio book, you can get the ebook, you can get the hardcover book. It's a great book for, the poopatorium. It's Oops While You Poops. That's the tagline for the book.
No, it's not, but it should be.
It's 37 chapters of my mistakes and what I've learned from them. And I've made great mistakes.
So the front cover of the book should probably be you sitting there reading it on the toilet, right?
That's not a bad idea. It's kind of me with banging my head against a wall with a briefcase at my feet. I should be
sitting on the toilet, banging your head into the wall.
With how about Oops as the title, but then a P in front in parentheses. That's nice. Now we're thinking, where were you 3 months ago when I was designing this?
I don't know. You could have always called and asked me, because we've known each other longer than 3 months, Kent.
That's true.
Was what it? Nah, I'm not going to go there. I'll tell you off air what I was going to go with, but I'm going to go ahead and we're going to sign off. Kent, you want to tell everybody where they can find you on the Twitter?
Yeah, at Kent Sterling, or you can go to kentsterling.com. I wrote a thing today. It's kind of a fictional conversation between Archie Miller and Bob Knight that was sort of fun to write. And so you can go there if you like, kentsterling.com.
All right, guys. And remember, you can follow us at Grueling Truth. You can hear all of our shows wherever you find podcasts. Basically everywhere. Just type in the Grueling Truth. So for now, we're going to wrap it up. For Kent Sterling, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak. Now,